On my wedding night, I opened the bridal door and found my alpha marking my sister. Luna looked up from his arms and smiled with blood on her throat. Damian told me to leave because she was thinly dressed and the corridor was cold. The room held every vow he had broken. Moonlight lay across the wolfskin rugs in long white bars. Agave wine breathed from the cups beside the bed. Lily of the valley clung to Luna's hair. Damian sat on the edge of the carved oak bed, his silver hair loose over one shoulder. His shirt hung open at the collar. Luna was tucked against his chest as if she had always belonged there. The fresh mating bite at her neck pulsed red under the moon. I kept one hand on the iron latch. The metal had a burr near the hinge. It cut 3 narrow lines across my knuckles. I did not feel them at first. Pain needs room. There was no room left in me. "Sister," Luna whispered, "Damian and I truly love each other. Please bless us." She used the voice she saved for witnesses. Soft. Small. Already wounded. Damian did not deny her. He drew the blanket higher over her bare shoulder and looked at me with gray eyes. They were the color of winter ash. No shame warmed them. No fear crossed them. "Luna will not fight you for rank," he said. "The marriage parchment bears your name. That will remain." Then he looked toward the corridor. "But she is cold," he said. "Go to the guest room." The guest room waited at the western end of Greyhold Keep, where the wind found every crack. Its hearth held dead ash, and its blanket smelled of cedar dust instead of smoke. I sat on the narrow bed in my wedding gown until dawn paled the torn window paper. Below the tower, the courtyard dogs barked at nothing and then stopped together. That sudden silence told me Damian had crossed the yard with Luna in his arms. A wolf keep always knew who was favored before the household announced it. By sunrise, the maids knew too. 2 servants whispered outside my door that Damian had placed the silver moon necklace around Luna's throat. One called it the Wood family mistress token. The other laughed and said a necklace mattered little after a mating mark. I opened the door while her laughter still hung in the cold air. Luna came from the bridal chamber in a new mourning robe. The silver crescent rested at her collarbone like stolen moonlight. She touched it when she saw me. Her smile arrived slowly, careful enough to look innocent. "Damian said it was too heavy for you," she told me. "He asked me to keep it safe." The necklace had belonged to his mother and hers before her. My own mother had witnessed the clause in the marriage contract. The token should have touched my throat after the wedding feast. Now it rose and fell with Luna's satisfied breath. Breakfast was served in the lower hall under banners stiff with old smoke. Damian sat at the Lord's chair. Luna sat at his left hand, in the place reserved for the lady of the keep. My chair waited near the far end of the long table. Distance can insult as clearly as speech. The kitchen brought honey porridge in white clay bowls. I smelled it before the bowl touched the table. Sweetness rolled across the steam and tightened something in my throat. I had avoided honey since childhood. After one spoonful nearly closed my breath. Every servant in Greyhold knew it. Every family healer had written it down. Damian had received those remedy notes during his winter fever 2 years before. Luna dipped her spoon, tasted, and raised her eyes toward me. "Why do you not eat, sister?" she asked. "Is the kitchen not good enough now?" "I am allergic to honey." Her lower lip trembled as if I had struck her. She pushed her bowl away with both hands. "I know you cannot forgive me," she said. "I will not eat another bite if my presence hurts you." Damian folded his hunting report and stared at me. "Eat. Honey sickens me." "You are making a scene," he answered. Luna ate from the same pot and did not die. Then his command entered the air with the weight of alpha blood. Eat it. The first spoon burned only with sweetness. The second made my tongue prickle. By the fifth, heat crawled across my wrists in a rash of red sparks. I set down the spoon and showed him my arm. The skin had already risen into tight welts. Damian looked once and laughed through his nose. You learned theater from jealous courtwomen. Luna lowered her eyes and murmured that she should return the necklace. Damian told her to keep it on. The room tilted when I stood. My knees loosened under my gown. I walked because I would not collapse before them. The hall door closed behind me with a heavy sound. Stone cooled my palm. Air thinned in my throat. I needed citra grass juice from the kitchen stores. One cup would open the breath if it came in time. The corridor bent near the armory. A dark gray cloak brushed my sleeve before I could turn. A man stopped 3 paces away. Silver-white hair caught the weak morning light. His dark gold eyes moved from my face to my swollen arm. Allergy? I could only nod. Every wolf in the north knew the Alpha King by scent before sight. Ronan of Frostmere carried winter iron in his blood. Even sick and half-blind with heat, I felt the corridor quiet around him. He took my wrist and turned it gently toward the window. The rash had climbed past my elbow. Citra grass, he said. He did not shout. He did not need to. A page ran as if death followed his heels. Ronan guided me onto the stone bench beneath the arch. His thumb rested near my pulse, steady as a hand on a sword hilt. Do not scratch. I wanted to answer sharply. My throat refused. The page returned with a cup of green juice. Ronan held it to my mouth and kept my wrist pinned with careful pressure. Bitter liquid slid down my swollen throat. At first it hurt. Then breath returned by degrees. I saw Luna's skirt vanish beyond the next archway. Ronan saw where I looked. His gaze cooled further. Tonight, he said, I will attend the feast. My name was Silsa Grey before the marriage ink dried. Greyhold had once been my mother's house, though my father ruled it after her death. We were not the richest pack in the western marches. We were useful. Our hunting roads crossed 3 valleys. Our clerks knew every oath between river lords and hill wolves. Then our daughters were raised to remember contracts because men called memory obedience when it served them. Mother taught me that ink could bleed like a wound. She taught me to read where power had pressed too hard. When she died, Father grew quiet and grateful for anyone who made decisions easy. Luna arrived 2 winters later. She was not born gray. A border patrol found her beside a ruined chapel with the greenwood crest sewn inside her cloak. Father said the old crest meant nothing without papers. He took her in as a ward and called the deed mercy. Luna learned quickly that mercy could be spent. She cried when servants watched. She forgot chores when brothers were near. Afterward, she called me sister only when someone important listened. I noticed. Then I taught myself to feel ashamed for noticing. That was how a house trains a girl to distrust her own eyes. Damian Wood first came to Greyhold after a raid burned his eastern granaries. He was handsome in the hard northern fashion. Tall, pale, and quiet. He carried grief well enough to look noble. His father had died before the last thaw. His debts had not. Our marriage would join his old name to my family's roads and money. Father called it balance. The elders called it duty. I called it a door I could survive. Damian wrote to me for 3 years after the betrothal. The letters smelled of pine wax and cold smoke. They praised my patience, my clear hand, and my calm judgment. I answered everyone. I sent dried lavender once. By then I sent a copy of Mother's remedy notes when fever struck his kennels. He thanked me beautifully. A beautiful lie still warms the fingers before it burns. At autumn hunts, he spoke to me in public and watched Luna in private. I saw more than he wished. I forgave more than I should have. The kingdom was old enough to hide its cruelties inside ceremony. By day, the packs looked like any medieval houses of stone, chapel bells, markets, mills, and muddy roads. At night, blood told the older truth. Alpha voices could bend weaker knees. Beta guards could scent fear under perfume. Mated wolves carried marks that law treated like living seals. A false bond could break inheritance. A stolen token could shift a council vote. The Alpha King kept the high law from Frostmere, a citadel beyond the northern ridge. He did not visit weddings for pleasure. He came when contracts touched border peace. My wedding had drawn him because woodland guarded the northern road. Damian thought rank would shield him. Luna thought softness would. Both forgot that wolves can smell rot through silk. I had met Ronan once before. 3 years earlier, a wolf tide broke from the black pines near the border. I held a cliff pass with 12 gray guards for 3 nights. On the last dawn, a stranger pulled me onto his horse and bled from the wrist for it. Only later did I learn the stranger was the king. I never forgot the scar on his wrist. By sunset, Greyhold dressed itself in candles and denial. 40 flames burned along the high table. Roasted venison steamed beside trenchers of black bread. Musicians played too loudly near the lower arch. Damian wore black velvet and the silver chain of wood authority. Luna wore pale green, thin enough to invite concern. The silver moon necklace flashed at every breath. I sat at Damian's right hand because Ronan had arrived before the bells. No steward dared move me lower while the king watched. Several elders offered wedding blessings as if mourning had not happened. Their words floated over the table and died among the candles. At last, Damian stood with his cup. He turned toward me with the practiced face of a husband. "Look at the snow falling under the moon," he said. "It never settles too deep, but always stays gentle and light." 4 words carried strange weight. Look. Under. Never. Always. Luna's lashes lowered. Her mouth curved for half a heartbeat. The sentence followed me back to the guest room. It scratched at the inside of my skull. I took the old letters from the cedar box beneath my bed. 13 letters lay on the sill in a crooked line. The candle guttered beside them. I read the first aloud. "Look at the frost along the gate. Under that cold spring still waits. Never doubt that patience can guard honor. Always keep faith with the moon." The second held the same 4 doors. The third did too. Different sentences. The same stressed words. Look. Under. Never. Always. Their first letters made Luna's name again and again. 3 years of courtship had been a game passed through my hands. The letters were not for me. They had used my betrothal as a corridor. I pressed my forehead to the cold sill until shame hardened into proof. Damian's study still burned with lamplight when I crossed the east stairs. I carried all 13 letters inside my sleeve. Rain had begun beyond the shutters. The keep smelled of wet stone and cooling fat. He stood with his back to the hearth, sorting estate rolls as if the night belonged to him. "Again?" he said when I entered. I laid the letters across his desk. "Luna." His fingers paused on the wax knife. I told him about the stressed words. I told him about the initials. Outside, I told him the first letter had been written after the hunt where he saw her by the falcon yard. He listened without surprise. That hurt more than denial would have. Yes, he said at last. I saw her first and knew. Then why marry me? He looked almost bored. The contract was already arranged. Your family roads were needed. Your dowry steadied my debt. The wife chair was yours. The heart was not. He said it as if fairness lived in portions. I want the marriage dissolved. Damian laughed once. It was a short, ugly sound. The council witnessed our marriage. Without my signature, you have no road out. The study door opened before I answered. Night Wind entered with Ronan of Frostmere. 2 elder scribes followed him, both wrapped in dark wool cloaks. Their tablets were already sealed. Ronan looked first at me. Then he looked at Damian. Wood, he said, the High Council has received a complaint. Before marriage, you exchanged covert vow language with Silsa Grey, an adopted ward under your bride's roof. On the wedding night, you completed a permanent mark with her before sealing lawful union with your named wife. Both acts violate Chapter 3 of the Wolf Code. 1 scribe unrolled parchment on the desk. 6 red seals glowed in the lamplight. Marriage void, Ronan said. Your signature is not required. Damian's face lost color by degrees. For the first time that day, fear found him. Luna stood in the corridor beyond the open door. She had followed close enough to hear the verdict. One hand clutched a sugared cake. The other closed around the silver moon necklace. Ronan turned his head. That token does not belong to Wood or Grey. Luna's hand froze. Greenwood House filed a search writ 3 years ago, he said. The crescent crest beneath that pendant is theirs. Luna's lips parted. No sound came. Damian stared at her as if she had become a stranger at his table. Ronan continued without raising his voice. Wood rank is reduced by 3 degrees. The eastern hunting ground and north slope timber return to Crown custody. Greyhold accounts will be examined for dowry misuse. The ward called Luna will be transferred to Greenwood custody until lineage is proven. Luna sank against the wall. The necklace rang once against stone. It was a small sound. It ended 3 years of careful pretending. The next 3 days moved like a trial held under glass. No one in Greyhold shouted. That was worse. Servants stepped softly. Elders avoided my eyes. Damian stayed in the west wing under guard. Luna remained in the chapel room with 2 women outside the door. Father arrived from Greyhold Manor on the 2nd afternoon. He looked at my rash marks, then at the annulment copy. Shame worked through his face slowly. I expected instruction. I expected him to ask me to soften the report for family peace. Instead, he said my mother's name and stopped. That was the closest he came to apology. I did not spend my strength teaching him what he had failed to know. Ronan sent healers for my throat and clerks for my contracts. He did not enter my room without invitation. Each restraint mattered. After a day of commands from crueler mouths, courtesy felt almost dangerous. It asked me to remember choice. That first night after the annulment order, Greyhold changed its sounds. The same doors opened more softly. The same servants lowered their eyes faster. At last, the hounds under the benches stopped growling when I passed, as if even animals understood that the hierarchy had shifted. I had not become powerful. Not yet. But the lie that made me powerless had cracked in public, and every crack lets in weather. Damian sent for me before midnight. The guard outside his chamber looked embarrassed to deliver the message. I went because fear grows larger in rooms we refuse to enter. He stood beside the shuttered window with no cloak, no chain, and no easy smile. Without the symbols, he looked younger and meaner. "You have made this larger than it needed to be," he said. I looked at the empty place where his lord chain usually rested. "You did that when you put your teeth in her throat on my wedding night." His jaw tightened. "You were never tender. You never asked for tenderness. Still, you asked for roads, dowry silver, and silence." He turned away as if the words bored him, but his fingers dug into the window frame. That was how I knew they had landed. Damian could bear hatred. He could not bear being understood. "Ronan will tire of you," he said. "Kings like women who need saving." "Then he will be disappointed," I answered. The guard opened the door for me when I left. Behind me, Damian struck the shutter hard enough to split the latch. I did not flinch until I reached the stair. Then I stood in the dark with my hand against the wall and let my knees shake where no one could spend the sight against me. Luna tried a different door. At dawn, she asked the chapel women to send me a note. The paper smelled of lily perfume and candle smoke. Her handwriting was small, slanted, and pretty enough to look harmless. She wrote that she had never meant to hurt me. She wrote that love had frightened her. Then she wrote that Damian had promised to protect us both. There was one line near the end that told the truth by accident. "If you let them take me, I will have nothing again." I read that line 3 times. For a moment, I saw the girl father had brought home from the ruined chapel. She had been thin. She had watched bread baskets with the fixed hunger of a child who knew food could vanish. Afterward, she had slept with one hand under her pillow, guarding a green scrap of cloth no one had yet understood. Then I remembered her smiling over the bridal bed. I remembered the honey steam. I remembered the necklace rising on her breath. Pity moved in me, but it did not command me. I sent the note to Ronan's scribe. Then I asked that Luna be given warm clothes for the Greenwood Road. That was all. Mercy could cover her shoulders. It would not cover the record. Ronan did not rush the investigation, though everyone knew he could have ended the matter with one order. That restraint made the elders uneasy. They preferred a king's anger to a king's patience. Anger burns quickly. Procedure leaves marks. He sat in the lesser council room with 2 scribes, a cup of untouched black tea, and every person Greyhold had trained to whisper. He asked short questions. Who carried the breakfast bowls? Who opened the bridal chamber? By then, who fetched Luna's robe? Who saw the necklace leave the reliquary? Who knew about honey? No one was allowed to answer for another person. No lord interrupted a servant. Outside, no alpha pressure entered the room without Ronan's eyes lifting from the page. Once, Damian tried to laugh when a stable boy stammered. Ronan set down his quill. The laugh died before it became sound. I watched from the side bench with a shawl around my rash-marked arms. My throat still ached. Every swallow reminded me that the body records truth before pride admits it. When the kitchen boy described Luna's request for extra honey, my skin prickled again. Not from sickness. From recognition. She had not needed poison strong enough to kill. She had needed pain visible enough to call performance and private enough to leave me begging. The evidence did not arrive as a grand revelation. It came in hands that shook. It came on tablets, scraps, ledgers, and old vellum. At last, it came because Ronan ordered the doors opened, and because I knew which rooms had been trained to keep quiet. Mara, the cook, pressed the kitchen wax tablet into my hand first. Luna had requested honey for my bowl before dawn. The name was there. The date was there. Plain ink. Plain theft. Mara's thumbprint sat beside the entry, dark with soot from the oven. She whispered that she had thought the lady knew. I did not ask which lady. Brother Cal brought the remedy book from the old infirmary. My allergy had been written there since childhood in Mother's square hand. The page listed citra grass, vinegar steam, and cold cloths for the throat. Damian's winter fever notes were tucked 3 pages later. He had received a copied remedy list with my name on it. Ignorance died quietly between those 2 pages. Elder Yvette took the silver moon necklace to the East Reliquary. Under the crescent clasp, hidden by a layer of tarnish, lay a tiny greenwood leaf. The mark matched the crest sewn into Luna's childhood cloak. Luna had worn a family claim she did not understand and a mistress token she did not own. Yvette removed the necklace with gloved hands. No one offered it back. 2 bridesmaids came next. Nessa and Joan smelled of soap, lavender, and fear. They testified that Luna had been dressed in a bridal robe hours before the vows, with pearl pins from Damian's private chest. They had believed she was his secret mate already. Nessa cried when she said it. Joan did not cry at all, which made her sound truer. The messenger boy was younger than I expected. He had carried folded notes from Damian to Luna after every autumn hunt. He thought the repeated words were a lover's game. Look. Under. Never. Always. He had watched Luna laugh over them near the falcon yard, while I stood across the field believing the letters were mine. Old Tavin, the falconer, confirmed the meetings. He had seen Damian and Luna behind the mews after the hunt horns ended. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they only stood close enough for scent to mark cloth. Tavin had kept silent to protect his wage. When I showed him the letters, his shame broke before his fear. Steward Pell unlocked the dowry chest with both hands. Wood debts had swallowed nearly half my dowry before the wedding. There were coin bags with broken seals, false repairs on granary accounts, and a loan against North Slope timber. Damian needed my name more than my heart. Pell did not say that. The numbers did. Sister Aaliyah brought Luna's ward papers from the chapel archive. The birth date had been scraped and rewritten twice. The first copy named a Greenwood search party. Still, the second removed it. Someone had wanted Luna useful but unclaimed. For once, Luna's fear showed without polish. It did not excuse her. It made the shape of her hunger clear. By dusk, the council table held honey, medicine, silver, letters, witness marks, falcon records, ward papers, and dowry ledgers. No one had to call me jealous anymore. The word sounded foolish beside so much ink. The council did not accept the evidence all at once. Old power rarely falls cleanly. Lord Brevin of the River Packs complained that a bridal insult should not threaten border treaties. Dame Odelia asked whether young women sometimes misunderstood romance. Another elder wanted to know if a permanent mark could be forgiven if the lawful bride showed generosity. Ronan let each question finish. Then he asked who would inherit a child born of Luna's mark while my marriage contract still stood. Silence answered. He asked which house would control the northern road if wood debts had been paid by gray silver under false terms. Silence deepened. He asked whether an alpha command used to force known poison into a bride's mouth belonged in a private quarrel. No one looked at Damian then. They looked at my hands. The rash had faded to bruised pink. I laid both wrists on the table. That was the only speech I needed for that part. Damian tried one last graceful lie. He said he had believed my allergy was childish dislike. Brother Cal opened the remedy book to Mother's page. Damian said the letters were poetic habit. The messenger boy repeated the 4 words in order, then pointed to Luna without meaning to. Damian said the necklace had been a kindness to a cold girl. Elder Yvette turned the clasp and showed the greenwood leaf. Every excuse became smaller once it had to stand beside an object. By late afternoon, even the elders who disliked scandal had begun arranging their faces for judgment. Father asked to speak with me before the final reading. We stood in the old solar where Mother had once taught me ledgers. Dust lay on the blue window glass. Rain moved over the courtyard in slanted threads. For years, that room had smelled of ink and dried rose petals. Now it smelled closed. I thought I was protecting the house, Father said. You were protecting ease. The answer made him close his eyes. He did not deny it. That was new. Your mother would have known faster. Yes, I said. The word hurt him. I let it. Some truths are not knives. They are mirrors held steady. He took a small iron key from his sleeve and placed it in my palm. It opened Mother's lower archive, the one he had sealed after her funeral because grief had made him superstitious. Inside were her copies of old Grey contracts, notes on ward law, and a private account of the Greenwood search party. Father had not destroyed them. He had only failed to look. Use whatever helps you, he said. I wanted to forgive him because I was tired. Instead, I closed my fingers around the key. Restitution first, I said. Feeling can wait. He nodded. That nod repaired nothing, but it began paying the debt in the only coin still useful. The High Council finished the public procedure at noon. The chamber stood below a ribbed stone roof and smelled of wax, vellum, and cold rain. Elders sat in a half circle. None looked as certain as they had at my wedding feast. A legal annulment is a blade when it cuts a powerful man. The scribe read every violation aloud. Hidden vow speech. Misuse of dowry support. Unlawful permanent mark. Transfer of mistress token to an unverified ward. Negligent endangerment after known allergy. Damian stood with his jaw locked. Luna stared at the floor. I signed the release with a clean hand. Then Ronan placed a second parchment beside it. It was not a trap. It was an offer of alliance between Grey and Frostmere. No hidden clause bound my body before my consent. No old debt bent my name. He waited while I read every line. Change what you need, he said. So I did. I changed the property clause first. Any land restored through my dowry would remain under my seal. Then I changed the council clause. My voice would not be held by my husband's chair. Ronan accepted both without a blink. Only then did I take the quill. The final reading filled the great hall. People came because scandal draws feet faster than duty. Merchants stood behind guards. Servants crowded the upper passage. Minor lords who had laughed at breakfast kept their faces carefully blank. Luna wore plain wool under a gray cloak. Damian wore black without silver. Ronan did not sit on the carved high seat. He stood at the council table, level with the law he was about to speak. That choice unsettled the room. Kings usually liked height. Ronan liked accuracy. The scribe read the hidden vow charge first. Each letter was named by season, seal, and witness. Then came the unlawful mark. The priestess confirmed that Luna's mating bite had been made before the lawful bridal rite. Then came the honey. Mara's tablet. Brother Cal's remedy page. The kitchen boy's testimony. Last came the dowry accounts, and that was where Damian finally looked afraid. Love had been useful cover. Money was the exposed bone. When the penalties were read, no one cheered. Wood rank reduced by 3 degrees. Hunting ground returned to Crown custody. North Slope timber seized until Grey dowry losses were repaid. Luna transferred to Greenwood custody under investigation of altered ward papers. Marriage void from the wedding hour. My name restored without stain. Those last words almost broke me. Not because I had doubted the truth. Because I had grown used to hearing truth spoken softly, if at all. To hear it carried across a hall by law felt like standing under rain after years of smoke. Outside the council doors, Damian's trunks were being loaded onto a narrow wagon. The wood crest had been covered with plain canvas. A man can lose a house before he loses breath. Damian saw me and stood very still. For one heartbeat, I thought he might speak my name with regret. He looked instead toward the sealed accounts chest. His grief had always known where money sat. Luna stood beneath the cloister pillars without the necklace. Her throat looked strangely bare. A greenwood carriage waited beyond the fountain. Its old steward bowed to her with correct distance. Respect can be colder than hatred. She had stolen love from the wrong rooms and found no home in either. I did not pity her enough to return. Ronan stepped beside me and offered his hand. The scar on his wrist gleamed white. I placed my fingers in his palm. He closed his hand lightly. The restraint said more than any vow spoken loudly in a hall. Luna crossed the courtyard before Damian did. The greenwood steward held the carriage door open, but he did not offer his arm until she reached for it. That small delay told me enough about the house waiting for her. They would claim blood. They would not reward theater. She looked back once. For the first time since childhood, her face held no audience. No soft tremble. No practiced shine. Only fear, anger, and something almost like grief. "Silsa," she called. The courtyard stilled. Damian lifted his head. Ronan did not move. I walked 3 steps toward her. No farther. "Did you ever mean sister?" I asked. Her mouth worked. For once, no prepared line came. "Sometimes," she said. It was a poor answer. It was also the first honest one she had given me. "Then learn what that word costs," I said. She climbed into the carriage without replying. When the door closed, the lily perfume faded under rain and horse leather. I stood until the wheels passed the gate. Then I turned away before pity could pretend it was duty. The road north climbed through wet fields and dark pine. Behind us, Greyhold shrank into mist. Ahead, the Frostmere ridge held a rim of old snow even in late summer. The carriage smelled of leather, firewood, and the sharp herb salve on my wrists. Ronan sat across from me until I asked him to sit beside me. He moved without triumph. That mattered. Men who mistake rescue for ownership only build a kinder cage. The wheels struck ruts near the second bridge. My shoulder bumped his cloak. He did not use the accident to claim closeness. He only asked whether the cold troubled my breathing. I remembered Damian saying Luna was cold while I stood in my wedding dress. "No," I said. "Northern wind is honest." Ronan looked toward the pale mountains. "Our hearths burn hard there," he said. "You will never be sent from one to warm another." For the first time since the bridal door, my breath did not hurt. Frostmere did not welcome me with garlands. It welcomed me with weather. The first gate stood between 2 black towers, each tower crowned with iron wolf heads that wore ice along their jaws. Men and women in dark cloaks lined the inner yard, their boots planted in old snow, their eyes bright with the guarded curiosity of a pack assessing a stranger. They did not know whether I was a rescued bride, a political burden, or a future queen who would soften their hard northern customs. I did not know either. Captain Vale met us at the steps. She was a broad-shouldered woman with a scar through one eyebrow and a braid threaded with iron rings. She bowed to Ronan first, then to me with the same depth. That second bow traveled through the yard like a thrown knife. Several older wolves noticed it. So did I. Your chamber is prepared, Lady Grey, she said. The king's rooms are across the east passage. Across, not joined. The word loosened something under my ribs. Ronan heard the breath I did not mean to release, but he made no show of it. He only asked Vale to send the steward, the healer, and the road ledgers after I had eaten. That was my first meal in Frostmere. Brown bread. Saltfish. Turnips roasted in goose fat. No honey appeared on the table. No one mentioned why. Courtesy can be loud when it chooses silence carefully. The steward came before dusk with 3 ledgers and a face full of doubt. His name was Ewan Marr. He had served Ronan's father and had the careful stiffness of a man who believed new women in royal halls preferred fabrics to figures. He laid the accounts before me politely, then began explaining road rents as if I were a child learning coin shapes. I let him speak for 7 minutes. Then I turned the second ledger around and placed my finger under a winter salt entry. The number was wrong. Not stolen, exactly. Shifted. Someone had moved 3 wagon fees from the western road to the Abbey Road, where fewer eyes would follow them. Ewan stopped breathing through his nose. A copying error, he said. Then the same copying error has happened in every thaw month for 5 years. Ronan stood near the hearth, silent. He did not rescue Ewan from embarrassment. He did not praise me for noticing. Then he allowed the room to become honest without decorating the moment. By midnight, Ewan had brought 2 more ledgers and a different voice. By morning, he asked whether Grey clerks used separate wax colors for temporary debts. That was the first time Frostmere treated my mind as useful before it treated my story as tragic. I slept better after that than I had in any bridal chamber. The northern packs tested me in smaller ways first. A mill lord's wife invited me to inspect her weaving room, then asked 3 questions about childbirth customs before offering any wine. A young beta captain saluted Ronan and only nodded to me until Captain Vale made him repeat the salute properly. At chapel, 2 old women left a honey cake near my place and watched to see whether I would tremble. I picked up the plate and handed it to the nearest page. For the guards, I said. Mark it plainly. The old women looked away. No punishment followed. None was needed. The next week, every dish at council carried a small carved marker listing its sweetener, herb, and meat. Servants appreciated the rule first. Then children with fevers did. By winter, nobles praised it as a Frostmere custom, as if it had not begun with 2 women trying to measure the bruise under my skin. That was how I learned to turn insult into procedure. Not every wound needed a dramatic answer. Some needed a rule so plain that cruelty had to work harder next time. Ronan's enemies watched the change with sour patience. Wood loyalists still held cousins in 3 minor towers, and Damian's humiliation had become a song in taverns that liked a fallen lord better than a wronged woman. At first, the trouble came as rumors. The king had taken a bride already spoiled by another man's house. The Grey woman ruled through tears. Frostmere would soon be governed by southern softness and kitchen complaints. Ronan asked whether I wanted the singers arrested. No, I said. Let them sing long enough to name who pays them. He smiled then, not warmly, but with the clean pleasure of a commander hearing a sound plan. Within a month, Captain Vale traced the coin to a mill on the old wood road. Within 2, we knew which courier carried messages from Damian's guarded estate. Afterward, within 3, the rumors changed. Now the songs warned that Frostmere listened from under floorboards and inside ale cups. That rumor was also wrong. We listened through wages, road tolls, and men who spent too much silver after market day. The truth was less magical and more useful. The attack came during the first hard snow. A supply train left Frostmere with salt, wool, lamp oil, and medicine for 3 ridge villages. At moonrise, a runner reached the gate with an arrow through his cloak and blood frozen along one sleeve. Woodmen had blocked the Black Pine Pass. Not enough to win a war. Enough to frighten villages into saying Ronan could not protect roads while listening to his new wife. The old captains wanted to charge before midnight. Ronan looked at the map, then at me. The room noticed. So did the captains. I studied the charcoal lines until the pass returned in memory. 3 years earlier, I had held that same cliff while rogue wolves came up through sleet. There was a goat track above the east shelf, too narrow for wagons but wide enough for lantern bearers. If raiders watched the lower road, they would chase light. Men hungry for proof of their own cleverness often do. Send decoy lamps above the shelf, I said. Keep the wagons dark below. Put archers behind the frozen mill wall, not the bridge. One captain opened his mouth. Ronan did not look at him. He only moved the black stones on the map where I had pointed. By dawn, the supply train reached the villages. 6 raiders were captured near the false lights. One carried Damian's seal cord tucked inside his boot. The captains stopped testing my place after that. The villages below the Black Pine Pass did not learn the whole truth at once. They learned that their medicine arrived before dawn, that the salt barrels were dry, and that 2 children with lung fever lived because the wagons had not burned. For most people, that was enough. Law looks grand from a council bench, but in a ridge village it becomes whether a mother can season soup, clean a wound, or keep a child breathing through a frozen night. I rode out 3 days later with Captain Vale and 12 guards. Ronan wanted to come. I wanted him elsewhere. If the king rode beside me, every old woman would thank him first, and every doubtful man would decide I had borrowed courage. Ronan heard the argument without offense, then sent his best farrier because the road would be glass after sunset. That was his answer. No wounded pride. No lecture about danger. Just useful protection placed where it would not swallow my purpose. At the first village, a healer named Betha met me beside a smoking chimney. Her hands were red from lye and cold water. She took the inventory tablet from me, checked the seals, and said the oil count was wrong by 2 jars. Captain Vale stiffened. The guards looked toward the wagons. Betha did not lower her eyes. Not stolen, she said. Broken last month. The old steward never corrected it. I gave her a fresh tablet and asked her to correct it in her own hand. She stared as if I had handed her a sword. Then she wrote slowly, pressing the stylus too deep because no one had taught her how lightly official wax needed to be touched. When she finished, the village headman tried to take the tablet from her. I closed my hand over it first. The healer keeps the medicine record, I said. A headman may witness it. Betha's mouth tightened. Not a smile. Something stronger. Behind her, 3 girls watched from the doorway with flour on their sleeves. They saw who held the tablet. That mattered. The second village gave me a harder lesson. Their miller had locked the grain book inside his own chest and claimed the key was lost. His wife stood behind him with one cheek yellowed by an old bruise. No one named the bruise. The whole room had learned to walk around it. I asked for an axe. The miller laughed because he thought noble women threatened more cleanly than they acted. Captain Vale brought the axe herself. The handle was ash wood, smooth from years of use. I placed it on the table between us and asked the miller's wife whether the chest contained village grain records. She looked at her husband. He smiled. That smile told me more than his answer would have done. Yes, she whispered. I broke the lock on the 3rd strike. The room jumped at the sound. So did I, though I hid it better. Inside the chest lay the grain book, 3 pawn brooches, and a marriage contract with the wife's dowry field scratched out in a different ink. The miller stopped laughing. We took him to Frostmere for formal hearing. We left his wife the field copy, the grain book, and 2 guards until her brothers could arrive. As we rode away, Captain Vale asked whether I knew the axe would break the lock. No, I said. I only knew the room needed to hear something break that was not her. Vale rode in silence for a while. Then she said my answer would trouble old captains. Good, I told her. Trouble wakes them. When we returned to Frostmere, Ronan was waiting in the lower yard instead of the throne room. Snow had gathered on his shoulders. He had been there long enough for the flakes to melt in his hair and freeze again near the ends. No one else would have noticed the impatience in that stillness, but I did. The miller? He asked. In the east cell. The wife has guards. The healer keeps her own record now. His gaze moved over my face, my cloak, my hands. Only when he found no blood did his jaw loosen. He wanted to touch me. He did not. That restraint had become its own language between us, careful and warm. You broke a lock, he said. 3 strikes. Vale says the room went silent. Rooms should learn. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Close enough. That night he brought the axe to my study. It had been cleaned and oiled. Someone had wrapped the handle in dark leather where my palm had blistered. I touched the new binding and felt an embarrassment so sharp it was almost anger. I did not need a trophy, I said. It is not a trophy. Ronan set it beside the door. It is a tool you used. Tools should be kept ready. I had no answer for that. Gifts from Damian had always carried a hook, a request, or a witness. This one leaned quietly against the wall and asked nothing of me. For a long time, that made it difficult to trust. The miller's hearing lasted half a day and changed more than his household. His wife Elsbeth stood before the council with the grain book pressed against her chest. Her brothers had arrived by then, broad men with red faces and very little patience. They wanted blood. Elsbeth wanted the field returned and the grain counted honestly before winter deepened. Ronan looked to me. I asked her to speak first. Her voice shook during the first sentence. It steadied by the fourth. By the time she named the scratched contract, even her brothers had stopped clenching their fists. The miller claimed she could not manage a field because grief had weakened her wits. Elsbeth opened the grain book to a page of careful figures. She had been keeping a second record in charcoal on flour sacks for 7 months. Every stolen measure was there. Every false sale. By then, every week when he had called her confused while eating bread bought with her accuracy. The council restored her field, fined the miller, and placed the village grain stores under a 3-person seal for 1 year. Elsbeth chose the healer Betha as one of the seal holders. The headman objected. The village women did not. Afterward, Elsbeth found me in the chapel passage. She did not thank me in the soft voice people use when they wish to keep power comfortable. She said she had forgotten what her own handwriting looked like on a clean page. Then write more, I said. She laughed once, startled by herself. That laugh followed me back to my chamber and stayed there longer than the sound of any formal praise. Not every case ended cleanly. Some women returned to houses where the law had corrected paper but not hearts. Some servants lied because their wages depended on men who stood behind them. Outside, some elders praised the open book rule in public and looked for narrower doors in private. Frostmere did not become just because one queen had been wronged and one king had listened. No place changes that easily. There were evenings when the work tasted like ash. I would sit in the records room after everyone left, reading the same line until the ink blurred. Those nights, anger returned in strange disguises. It sounded like Damian laughing over my swelling wrists. It smelled like honey steam. At last, it wore Luna's silver necklace and asked why I had not seen sooner. Ronan found me there once with the lamp burned low. He did not tell me to sleep. He sat across the table and opened a road petition. For nearly an hour, we worked without speaking. The scratch of his quill steadied the room. At last I said, "Some days I hate that proof is needed." He kept writing for one more line. Then he set the quill down. "So do I. You are the king. People believe you. Some do. Some fear me. Still, some obey because refusal costs too much. Belief is rarer than rank makes it look." I looked at the stacked petitions between us. Each page held someone asking to be believed by people trained to profit from doubt. "Then what is the use?" I asked. Ronan touched the edge of the nearest page. "This. Not because it makes belief easy. Because it makes disbelief answerable." That sentence became part of me. Not all at once. Slowly, like heat entering cold stone. Luna wrote to me once in her own hand after a year at St. Bridget's. The letter arrived without perfume. The paper was plain and badly folded. For several minutes, I only looked at my name on the outside. Silsa Grey. No sister. No lady. Then, no plea dressed as affection. Ronan was in the room when it came. He stood to leave. I asked him to stay, then changed my mind before he reached the door. He nodded and went out without asking which wish had been truer. That was why I opened the letter instead of burning it. The room belonged to me. So did the choice. Luna wrote that the healing house smelled of vinegar, fever, and marsh water. She wrote that children cried without caring whether tears made them pretty. She wrote that the matron had slapped her hand the first time she used too much honey in a throat syrup, then made her copy the allergy book until dawn. Afterward, she did not ask me to lie. She did not ask me to forgive. Near the end, she wrote, "I thought being chosen meant never being cold again. Now I think I made other people cold so I could stand near a fire." I folded the letter along its crooked crease. My hands stayed calm. There are apologies that arrive too early and ask to be fed. There are apologies that arrive late and bring their own bread. Luna's was not enough to rebuild sisterhood. It was enough to leave unanswered without hatred. I placed it in a separate box, not with the evidence. Evidence belonged to law. That letter belonged to whatever mercy becomes after it stops lying. The next summer, the Western Pax gathered at Frostmere for the Moon Road Assembly. It was the largest council since my annulment, and every house understood that the open book rule would either harden into custom or be cut down by polite amendments. Lord Brevin arrived with 6 clerks, 2 daughters, and a smile broad enough to hide a knife. He praised my courage at dinner. Then he proposed that household records be open only to male guardians, senior wives, and appointed stewards. The hall went very still. It was a clever attack. He did not argue against records. He argued for proper access. By then, he spoke of order, modesty, privacy, and protection from malicious accusations. Every word wore clean clothes. I waited until he finished. Then I asked his elder daughter, Lady Maud, whether she knew the current value of her marriage portion. Brevin flushed before she answered. That was useful. Maud looked at him, then at me. No, she said. Do you know who holds the document? My father's steward. Could you inspect it today? Brevin stood so quickly his chair struck the floor. Ronan did not move from the high seat. The hall watched the fallen chair more than the angry lord. Maud's younger sister spoke then. She was barely 16. I would like to know mine too. The amendment died before sunset. Not because I defeated Brevin with a grand speech. Because his daughters made his argument visible. After that, several lords discovered urgent respect for transparency. Fear of looking like Brevin did more work than virtue. I accepted the help anyway. That assembly also taught me what Ronan risked by letting my voice stand apart from his. 3 northern alphas came to him privately after the vote. I did not hear the whole conversation, but the old walls carried enough. They warned that a king who let his queen challenge lords in open session would breed unruly households. They said wives would mistake access for authority. Outside, they said daughters would delay marriages while reading contracts. One even said servants would start thinking themselves witnesses. Ronan let the last sentence hang. Then he asked what a servant should be called after seeing a crime. No one answered. A witness, he said. His voice never rose. That made the words colder. When the alphas left, I entered with the western road maps as if I had not paused outside the door. Ronan gave me one look and knew I had heard. For the first time in many months, anger broke through his restraint. Not at me. For me. It moved in his eyes, gold and brief, before he mastered it. They will blame you, I said. They already do. Does it trouble you? Yes. The honesty surprised me. He came closer, stopping at the edge of the map table. Not because they blame me, because sometimes I want to make them afraid enough to be silent, and that would prove their point about power. I understood then that restraint was not absence of anger. It was anger kept from becoming law. I loved him more carefully after that, which was the only way love had begun to feel safe. The alphas did not challenge the rule openly after that, because no one wanted to appear afraid of daughters reading their own contracts, yet resistance traveled by slower roads. One keep delayed sending its ward book because the steward claimed damp had damaged the binding. Another sent pages copied so cleanly that every date looked written by the same hand, which meant the past had been made tidy after the command. A third delivered a marriage ledger with 2 pages missing and a little note saying mice had eaten them. Captain Vale laughed at the mice. I sent the ledger back with a silver trap and a demand for the original. These games exhausted me more than battle stories ever admitted. Open enemies give the body something to do. Hidden resistance makes the mind chew itself raw, especially when every polite delay forces an injured person to wait longer for a truth already known by the room. For 3 weeks, I woke before dawn with my jaw aching from dreams in which every door in Greyhold opened into another guest room. Ronan noticed the sleeplessness, though he waited until I named it first. I keep thinking the law will be hollowed out by people who smile at it, I told him one morning. We were in the winter garden, where Frostmere grew bitter herbs beneath glass panes clouded by frost. Citra grass stood in narrow beds along the south wall. Its green blades smelled sharp enough to pull memory through my throat. Ronan cut one blade with a bone knife and laid it across his palm. Then we make hollowing it expensive, he said. That afternoon, he proposed inspection riders chosen by lot from houses that had no kinship ties to the keep being examined. I added that every inspection must include 1 healer, 1 clerk, and 1 household woman named by local servants rather than by the lord. The last clause caused the most outrage. That told me it mattered most. When Lord Brevin called the idea disorder, Lady Maud asked whether order meant her father's steward should continue holding documents she was forbidden to read. Her voice shook, but it carried. The hall remembered his fallen chair. Brevin sat very still. The inspection rule passed with fewer votes than I wanted and more than our enemies expected. Afterward, Maud found me near the chapel basin, where thaw water fell from a wolf's stone mouth into a black bowl. She thanked me too formally. I told her she had done the harder part herself. I was terrified, she said. Good, I answered. Courage that does not know fear is only habit. She laughed, then covered her mouth because noble daughters were still taught to hide sounds that did not flatter the room. I lowered her hand gently. No one in the chapel died from hearing her joy. That, too, was a record of sorts. The first inspection party rode before the last snow melted. I went with them because the rule was mine, and because sending others to bear the first anger would have made the law smell of cowardice. We rode east to Harrowmere, a damp tower house whose lord had married 3 daughters into good families and buried one ward under a chapel stone with no clear cause written beside her name. The road crossed marshland where reeds clicked together like old bones. Fog rose from the ditches and beaded on the horses' manes. Harrowmere's lord greeted us with a feast laid too early and too rich. Venison in plum sauce. White bread. Honeyed pears. I looked at the pears until the steward remembered himself and had them removed. No apology came. The absence was honest enough. Their ward book was kept in a chest beneath the chapel altar. The key hung on the Lord's belt, which told me everything before the lock opened. Inside, the pages were dry, neat, and incomplete. 3 girls had entered the household across 10 years. 2 had married. 1 had died of fever, according to the record. The healer in our party, Betha of the Ridge Village, touched the death line with one red finger. No fever treatment is listed, she said. The Lord answered that women often failed quickly in marsh air. Betha looked at the window, then at the floor, then at the old water stain beside the altar. Marsh fever leaves more than one line, she said. We found the girls' letters in the laundry loft, hidden inside a split beam by a servant who had died the previous winter. The letters were addressed to a brother who had never received them. They described a promised marriage changed without consent, a dowry chest opened before vows, and a fall on the chapel stair after she refused to sign. No one letter proved murder. Together, they proved a life had been pressed until it broke. I sent riders for the brother. I sealed the chapel chest. Then I ordered the Lord's daughters summoned from their married houses to confirm their own contract copies. He called that an insult to his honor. I told him honor that feared daughters reading parchment was already wounded. That night I slept badly in Harrowmere's guest chamber, yet I did sleep. The room was cold, but it was not the old cold. There were guards outside by my order, a sealed chest under my authority, and a dead girl's letters beside my bed waiting to reach someone who had loved her. Sometimes justice begins too late for the person who needed it first. That does not make it useless. It makes delay unforgivable. The Harrowmere case traveled farther than my own because it belonged to no royal romance. There was no alpha king rescuing a bride from a marked sister. No stolen necklace glittered in candlelight. No coded letters spelled a rival's name. There was only a dead ward, a missing brother, a chapel chest, and a lord who had trusted damp stone to keep secrets better than paper. When the brother arrived, he carried a woodcutter's axe and a face emptied by 10 years of unanswered letters. He read his sister's last page in the council room while everyone pretended not to watch his hands shake. After he finished, he did not weep. He asked where she was buried. I took him to the chapel yard myself. The stone had her name spelled wrong. That mistake undid him. Not the death line. Not the broken contract. The wrong letter carved into stone by people who had owned her last days and still could not be troubled to know her name. He knelt in the wet grass and pressed his forehead to the marker. I stood behind him until rain soaked through my cloak. Ronan had taught me that witness sometimes means staying when there is nothing useful left to do. Harrowmere's lord lost ward rights, paid blood debt to the brother, and surrendered his household books to Crown custody for 7 years. The judgment did not raise the dead girl. No judgment could. But after her name was corrected, 3 servants came forward with other hidden letters, and 2 daughters requested copies of their marriage terms before returning to their husbands. The dead do not always leave quietly. Sometimes, when the door finally opens, they bring the living with them. On the ride home, Betha asked whether Law always felt this bitter. I told her it felt bitter when late, heavy when early, and dangerous when useful. She considered that for half a mile. Then she said useful was enough. I agreed, though I wished enough did not have to carry so much. The Harrowmere ruling made Damian's supporters more desperate. They had hoped to paint me as a woman building law from personal humiliation, but a dead ward in a marsh chapel made that accusation harder to sell. If household records could expose Harrowmere, they could expose any keep that treated women, wards, and servants as movable property with soft voices. That fear joined Damian's resentment like dry straw meeting a coal. The intercepted letters from Wood cousins changed tone after Harrowmere. Before, they mocked me. After, they named me dangerous. One warned that if the record lady lived long enough, half the Western houses would be forced to return coin, land, or daughters they had quietly absorbed. Another asked whether Ronan could be separated from my influence by making the roads look unsafe under my advice. Captain Vale brought me that letter herself. They are planning more than rumor, she said. We stood in the armory beneath racks of spears and winter bows. Men trained in the yard beyond the open doors, their boots striking packed snow in steady rhythm. I read the letter twice. The script belonged to Damian's cousin Osric, a man who had smiled at my annulment, hearing with more teeth than warmth. They will not attack Frostmere directly, I said. They will attack proof that Frostmere works. Vale nodded toward the map wall. Roads. Or villages that accepted the new records. That meant Betha's village. Elsbeth's mill. The inspection riders. People who had trusted the rule before it was old enough to protect them by reputation. My first fear was sharp and personal. My second was colder. If those people suffered because they had believed me, the law would become a warning instead of a shelter. Ronan entered while I still held the letter. He read my face before the page. Tell me where, he said. No command. No doubt. Just the question that mattered. We spent that evening moving pins across the road map until the pattern stopped looking like scattered malice and began looking like strategy. Every threatened place had accepted the open book rule early, and every messenger path crossed old wood grazing land that Damian's cousins still treated as a private kingdom. The attack, when it came, would not be aimed at my heart in the old simple way, because Damian had learned that private cruelty now created public evidence. It would be aimed at the people whose trust made the new law real, which meant answering it required more than guarding my chamber or surrounding Ronan with blades. Damian's second trial was colder than the first. The first had been about betrayal, which people can dress in romance if they squint hard enough. The second was about roads, medicine, and winter villages. No one could call that love. He was brought to Frostmere Abbey in a plain cloak with iron on his wrists and mud on the hem of his fine boots. He looked thinner. At last, he also looked angrier, as if consequence had insulted him by continuing after he left the room. When the messenger cord was placed on the table, he said it had been stolen. When the captured courier named him, he called the man bought. Still, when Captain Vale produced the mill accounts, he fell silent. I testified after the road wardens. My words were few. I identified his seal, his hand on the earlier debt papers, and the pattern that joined private appetite to public danger. Damian stared at me throughout, waiting for hatred. I gave him dates. That angered him more. Ronan delivered sentence after the elder vote. Damian would lose the remaining wood title, repay road damages from the sale of his southern holdings, and live under Abbey watch until the next royal review. No blade fell. No blood spilled. The punishment was smaller than songs would like and larger than pride could bear. He had to live without being the center of the room. Word from Greenwood arrived late that winter. Luna's lineage had been confirmed through the hidden crest, an old chapel witness, and a midwife's mark recorded before the border raid. She was legitimate Greenwood blood, but legitimacy did not open every locked heart. Lord Ansell accepted her into the family archive, then sent her to St. Bridget's healing house on the Western Marsh. The report was written by the matron, not by Luna. It said she knew herbs quickly, disliked cold water, and cried the first week when no one excused her from night rounds. It also said she stayed beside a fevered child for 6 hours during a storm because the girl would not release her hand. I read that sentence twice. I did not know what to do with it. Part of me wanted her punished forever. Another part remembered the child with a green scrap of cloth under her pillow. In the end, I folded the report and placed it in the archive. People are not made clean by one decent act. They are not made useless by one terrible hunger either. The law had done its work. Her soul was no longer mine to measure. When the last tribunal seal dried, Frostmere did not burst into celebration because northern people distrust happiness that arrives too loudly. The kitchens baked rye cakes, the guards changed watch, and the chapel bell rang only once for the close of judgment. I liked that restraint more than any feast Damian could have staged. It allowed the air to feel clean without pretending the wound had never existed. Ronan found me in the records room after sunset where I was reading the copied verdict by a lamp with a cracked green shade. He did not ask whether I was satisfied, because satisfaction was too small a word for what had happened. He asked whether any clause still troubled me. That question settled deeper than praise, since it treated my future as a document I had the right to edit. I signed the release again in the Frostmere register, not because the first signature had failed, but because Northern law kept its own archive. My hand did not shake that time. The ink went down black and plain, with my birth name written before any title. A clerk dusted the page with sand, and the grains glittered like tiny stars before he shook them away. Outside, the wall torches burned blue in the snow wind, and Ronan walked beside me without touching my elbow. He had learned quickly that guidance can feel like a grip to someone newly freed. At the stair, he offered his arm and waited. I took it after a breath, choosing the contact before custom could choose for me. The central hearth of Frostmere roared when we entered the king's hall, throwing gold light across black beams and wolf-carved pillars. Ronan looked at the fire, then at me. "Our hearths burn hard here," he said, "but no hearth in my house buys warmth by sending one woman into cold for another." The words were simple enough to trust. Spring came slowly over the northern ridge, first as dripping icicles, then as dark soil showing through ruined snow. I learned the citadel by work rather than ceremony. The granary keys hung in the steward's office, the road petitions arrived every third morning, and border captains argued over salt with the seriousness other courts reserved for jewels. No one asked me to become decorative. That saved me from having to refuse. News of Damian reached us in careful pieces, each stamped by the high scribe. His lands were administered by crown officers until his debts could be counted without lies. His unlawful bond to Luna remained valid in blood, but stripped of political claim, which was a punishment sharper than gossip. He had wanted a wife for roads and a mate for worship. The law left him with neither power nor admiration. Luna's fate was quieter, and perhaps that made it harder for her. Greenwood House accepted her blood after the crest was proven, but blood is not the same as welcome. They sent her to a remote healing house where foundlings, widows, and fevered shepherds needed clean bandages more than pretty tears. If she learned service there, it would be because no audience rewarded suffering performed for gain. I did not ask Ronan to ruin them further. Revenge can become another chain if a person carries it too long. The verdict had named the wrong, repaired the records, restored my property, and warned the packs that private betrayal could not hide behind rank. That was enough. Anything beyond that would have made Damian and Luna the center of my life again, and I had escaped that altar. On the first full moon after thaw, Frostmere gathered in the outer court to renew road oaths. Wolves stood in human shape under banners stiff with frost, their eyes catching silver when the moon cleared the roofline. Ronan placed the council staff in my hands for the Western petitions. The weight surprised me. It was not light, but it was honest, and honest weight can be carried. A young bride approached after the ceremony, twisting her sleeve until the seam nearly tore. Her husband had given her winter cloak to a cousin who cried prettily in public, and his mother had called the theft kindness. The girl's voice shook as she told me. I heard myself in that shaking. I also heard the old room, the cold blanket, and Damian's command to leave. Then I did not tell her to endure for peace. I asked for names, witnesses, dates, and household records. Her eyes widened as if I had opened a window in a locked tower. That was when I understood the true lesson of the bridal room. Pain becomes useful only when it teaches us how to keep another person from being trapped by the same door. The petition became the first case I judged without Ronan beside the chair. I ordered the cloak returned before sunset, then required the husband to answer why Charity had needed his wife's shame as payment. He had no answer that survived the hall's silence. The young bride did not smile when she left. She stood straighter, which was better. The young bride's name was Mira Vale, and she returned 2 days later with a bundle of household scraps tied in blue thread. She had brought the cloak receipt, a maid's note, and 3 charcoal marks from the storage door where her husband's cousin had hidden the garment. Her hands shook when she placed them before me, but she did not apologize for taking space in the chamber. That change mattered more than the cloak. It told me she had begun to believe her own account before asking anyone powerful to confirm it. Her husband arrived with his mother and the offended cousin before the noon bell. They expected tears. They had prepared for tears. The mother carried a white kerchief, and the cousin kept her eyes lowered in that practiced way I knew too well. When Mira did not weep, their little play lost its first cue. It was Charity, the mother said. The cousin came with nothing. Then Charity should have asked the owner, I answered. Mira's husband shifted his weight. He was not cruel in the grand way Damian had been cruel. That almost made him more dangerous, because small selfishness often survives by looking ordinary. He had wanted peace at home, praise from his mother, gratitude from his cousin, and silence from his wife. He had spent Mira's dignity because it was the cheapest coin on his table. I ordered the cloak returned, then required him to replace the torn lining from his own hunting purse. After that, I asked Mira whether she wished the cousin punished. The room turned toward her. She swallowed once. No, she said. I want the store keys held by both spouses. It was a better answer than mine would have been at her age. I wrote the order myself. By evening, 3 other wives had asked whether shared keys could be added to their contracts. That was how reform began in Frostmere, not as thunder, but as a line of women waiting outside the records room with proof in their sleeves. Ronan read the shared key orders beside me that night. The fire had burned low, and the map table was crowded with petitions, wax, and 2 cups of tea gone bitter from neglect. He took longer over Mira's case than I expected. At last he said his mother had once lost a winter cloak to a cousin with better tears. I looked at him. He had never mentioned his mother without care. "What happened?" I asked. My father called it a small matter. The sentence held no drama, yet grief moved beneath it like water under ice. For the first time, I saw that Ronan's restraint had not been born whole. It had been built against inheritance, choice by choice, until power no longer needed to sound like his father's voice. Did she get it back? No. He set the petition down. She died before I was old enough to understand why she stopped asking for things. The room became very quiet. I reached across the table and placed my fingers near his, not on them. He looked at the space between our hands, then covered it with his own. We stayed that way while the fire settled and the wax cooled. No vow could have taught me more about the man I had chosen. The next season brought Harvest Court, when every allied pack sent disputes before the first frost closed the roads. I heard arguments about grazing, mill water, marriage portions, hunting injuries, and one ridiculous quarrel over a silver cup both cousins claimed had belonged to a dead aunt. Those cases taught me more about rule than any crown ceremony could have done. Most injustice did not arrive wearing a villain's face. It arrived as convenience, family pressure, tradition, or a tired elder saying the matter was too small for ink. I began keeping a separate book for small matters. Captain Vale teased me for it until the book solved 3 feuds before winter. In it, I recorded who had been told to endure, who had profited from the endurance, and what object proved the cost. A cloak. A goat. Afterward, a key. A spoon. A letter. When young scribes complained that these details were beneath law, I sent them to the kitchens for a month. They returned knowing how much a missing measure of salt could change a stew, a wage, or a sick child's broth. After that, they wrote smaller numbers with better respect. I thought Mother would have liked that. My own name changed slowly in the mouths around me. At first, I was Lady Grey, the wronged bride. Then I became Lady Silsa, the king's chosen. By the second winter, petitioners at the gate asked for the record lady. I laughed when I heard it. Ronan did not. He said titles are only useful when they tell people where to bring their trouble. The name stayed. Children used it first because children like titles that sound like tasks. Then widows used it. Then merchants. Even old lords used it when they needed my seal on a road dispute and wanted to pretend they had always respected the office. I did not correct them. I had been called jealous, cold, barren of grace, difficult, dramatic, and ungrateful in the space of one broken marriage. Record lady sounded clean. It sounded like work. It sounded like a door that opened onto a table, a lamp, and enough ink to make the truth sit still. That spring, I returned once to Greyhold with Ronan, not as a bride being delivered, but as a council witness inspecting restored accounts. The western guest room had been repaired, and the steward proudly showed me the new window paper, the swept hearth, and the folded blanket laid square across the narrow bed. I thanked him because the work deserved thanks, yet I did not step inside for long. Rooms remember, but they do not own the living. In the lower hall, the long table had been shortened by 2 leaves, since Damian's visiting retinue no longer filled it with noise and borrowed importance. Father met me beside Mother's portrait and gave me the final dowry ledger with his seal already pressed into the wax. He did not ask for tenderness. He asked whether the restitution was complete. That was the first wise question he had given me in years. I checked the sums, found them correct, and signed the receipt with a calm hand. Only then did he say he was sorry. The apology did not undo the bridal night, the honey, or the years when my doubt had been fed back to me as disobedience, but it arrived after action instead of before it, which made it lighter to carry. Before we left, I visited Mother's archive and placed a copied version of my case beside her old notes on ward law. Not as a shrine. Not as a wound. as a warning with dates, witnesses, remedies, and names. If another Grey daughter ever opened that drawer with nowhere else to turn, she would find more than grief waiting for her. The journey back to Frostmere took 3 days because thaw had turned the road edges soft, and those slow miles gave me time to understand why the old houses feared written truth more than open anger. Anger could be dismissed as temper, especially when it came from a woman whose place had already been questioned, but a dated record forced every comfortable witness to choose between memory and convenience. Ronan spoke little during that ride, though he listened when I described how Greyhold servants had learned to hide knowledge in laundry counts, kitchen tallies, and chapel errands because noble rooms punished direct speech. By the second evening, we had drafted a new rule requiring each allied keep to maintain open household books for food, medicine, marriage tokens, and ward papers, with penalties for any lord who sealed those records from the women legally affected by them. The rule sounded dry when written, almost dull enough to escape ridicule, yet I knew it would have changed everything if it had existed before my wedding night. No law can make the cruel gentle, and no ledger can make the selfish ashamed, but a clear record can shorten the distance between private harm and public answer. That was enough for one season, and enough is sometimes the only honest beginning a damaged life can trust. When the open book rule passed at Harvest Court, several lords complained that household peace would suffer if every injured wife, ward, servant, and daughter could demand to see the page where her life had been altered. I answered that peace built on hidden pages was not peace but storage, and stored harm always returns with interest when winter, hunger, inheritance, or pride gives it a door. The Abbey scribes copied that answer into the margin because Ronan asked them to preserve the exact wording, though he never claimed the sentence as his own or used his approval to make it heavier. That quiet respect changed the way the room heard me, since the king's restraint left no shadow over my voice and no doubt about whose judgment had shaped the rule. By the time the seals cooled, even the lords who disliked me understood that the new law did not ask them to love justice, only to leave enough evidence for justice to find them. I knew some would obey the rule only because disobedience had become expensive, yet that did not trouble me, because law often begins as a fence before it becomes a habit. The first winter after the rule, 3 forged ward papers were corrected, 2 dowry ledgers were reopened, and 1 alpha apologized to his daughter in writing because speaking the words before witnesses had frightened him. None of those repairs sounded like songs, but every repaired page changed the shape of a room somewhere beyond my sight, and that was better than applause. Whenever younger women asked whether records could truly protect them from cruelty, I told them records could not replace courage, but courage without proof was too easily fed to polite doubt. Then I showed them how to date a page, seal a copy, name a witness, and keep one version where no angry hand could reach it. After that, Frostmere women began bringing smaller complaints before they became disasters. A miller's daughter came with a broken betrothal token. A widow came with a brother who had seized her goats. By then, a laundress came because a guard used alpha pressure to take kisses behind the stable wall. Each case looked ordinary to men who benefited from order. Each one showed where order had been confused with obedience. Ronan did not interfere, even when old captains shifted uneasily at my rulings. Once, after I fined a veteran for threatening a servant, the hall waited for the king to soften my words. He only asked the captain whether his hearing had failed. The question traveled through Frostmere faster than any proclamation. By winter, fewer men tested whether my chair was decorative. Power settled differently when it was used in daylight. I began to understand why Mother had respected records more than promises. A promise asks people to remember the best version of themselves. A record remains when fear, desire, pride, or hunger edits memory. That did not make records gentle. It made them necessary in a world where teeth could hide behind court manners. Sometimes grief returned without warning. It came when Lily of the Valley bloomed near the chapel wall. It came when a servant carried honey cakes through the corridor. Outside, it came when Ronan's hand moved too quickly near my wrist, though he stopped the instant my breath changed. Healing was not a door closing behind me. It was a road that asked to be walked again each morning. Ronan learned those roads with a patience that would have embarrassed a lesser man. He asked before entering rooms. He listened when I corrected a boundary map. At last he laughed only when I did, and never at pain I had not offered him. His affection did not demand that I forget Damian. It made forgetting unnecessary because the old hurt no longer ruled the present table. Our own bond was sealed at midsummer, after 3 separate readings and 1 private conversation that mattered more than the ceremony. I asked Ronan what he would do if I refused the final rite. He said he would remain my ally, return my letters, and keep my council seat untouched. Only then did I understand that consent was not a word spoken before witnesses. It was the road left open after refusal. The rite itself was quiet. No stolen necklace flashed at another woman's throat. No hidden name waited inside a speech. The priestess placed moon salt on our palms, and the old northern wolves sang low enough for the stones to tremble. When Ronan marked me, he waited for my nod. The bite burned, then steadied, and warmth moved through me without shutting any door behind it. I wore no silver moon necklace that day. The wood token had returned to its vault, and I wanted no borrowed symbol from a house that had mistaken me for a contract. Instead, I wore Mother's plain iron ring on a chain beneath my gown. Iron does not glitter like silver. It holds under strain, which made it the truer ornament. During the feast, Ronan rose with a cup of dark northern wine and spoke only 1 sentence for me. Silsa Grey stands here by her own will, and my house is stronger because no one dragged her to its hearth. The hall answered with the old wolf salute, fists to hearts, not cups slammed for noise. I looked across the flames and felt no need to search his words for a hidden name. That night, the bridal chamber door stood open until I closed it myself. The room smelled of cedar, snow air, and clean linen warmed beside the hearth. I touched the latch and found no burr waiting to cut me. Ronan watched from the window and let me have that small inspection without comment. Some freedoms look ordinary from outside. From within, they are vast as kingdoms. One winter evening, a messenger brought news that Damian had requested permission to retire to a southern monastery. The tribunal allowed it after his remaining lands were sold to repay crown debts and Grey dowry losses. I read the notice twice. No triumph rose in me, only a tired release. Some men call themselves ruined when they are merely stopped from ruining others. The same packet held a note from the healing house where Luna served. It was not written by her. The matron reported that Luna had learned herb measures well, though she still disliked night duty and plain wool. That sounded like truth, which gave me a strange peace. I did not need her transformed into a saint. I only needed her unable to purchase comfort with another woman's erasure. Years later, people would tell the story as if Ronan had rescued me in a single night because tales prefer clean blades and sudden kings. That version was easier, but it was not true. He brought law, power, and a road north, yet I brought the letters, the memory, the refusal, and the hand that signed. Rescue without selfhood is only a change of keeper. I kept the first 3 bloodlines from the doorframe scar on my knuckles, pale beneath the skin whenever winter made my hands cold. They reminded me that I had touched the door before I understood the room. They also reminded me that leaving had begun before Ronan arrived. It began when I saw the lie and refused to name it love. The old letters stayed in a locked chest below the archive, wrapped in linen and sealed with my mark. I did not burn them because fire can flatter anger by making proof disappear. Some days, a clerk used them to teach young scribes how hidden vow speech works. The word Luna appeared again and again in neat columns, drained of romance and made useful at last. At night, when the wind hit the shutters hard, Ronan and I sat near the hearth with maps between us and cups of bitter tea cooling beside our hands. Sometimes we spoke of roads. Sometimes we spoke of nothing. Silence had changed its meaning there. It no longer meant surrender, concealment, or fear. It meant a room where no one forced me to perform my own wound. That is the part worth remembering. A promise is not holy because powerful people witnessed it. A bond is not righteous because desire named itself fate. Then a sister's tears are not proof, and a husband's command is never truth. Love that needs another person's humiliation to stay warm is only hunger wearing a tender face. So I built my life where the northern fires burned clear, and I learned to answer cruelty without becoming cruel. I kept records. I heard servants. Afterward, I trusted the body that warned me before the room agreed. Most of all, I stopped mistaking endurance for goodness. A woman may walk out of a cold bridal chamber and still carry warmth with her,